All right, so we're going to get started regardless of the lack of turnout today. You got two handouts. The first is exercise 126, which we'll be working on today. It goes hand in hand with assignment 106, which you also get today. What we're going to be doing is using the same program of square footage and who you're designing for, etc., as assignment 105, the one that you just did with the AutoCAD drawings. You can elect to use your same design and just build it in 3D in SketchUp, or you can tweak it and change it and modify it as you see fit. That doesn't mean that you have to start over. It might mean that you want to. It depends on how happy you were with your last design. You have the flexibility to tweak it if you want, and I want you to know that you have that flexibility. If you end up doing the same exact building, no harm in that either. I'm going to concentrate today on teaching you how to take AutoCAD drawings and put them into SketchUp and work with them, such that if you've already done some AutoCAD work, it makes an easy transition into SketchUp. That may become a workflow that you're comfortable with. You may take 136 and become comfortable in Rhino. The same techniques basically work in Rhino too, in terms of how you would bring an AutoCAD drawing through in and start modeling. Again, it's a little bit of what you're comfortable with. Some of you may start fresh in SketchUp and start doing your design work in SketchUp. There's no harm in that, but I want you to at least be exposed to the skill of how the two software programs can be connected. So you're welcome to look through it. In assignment 106, what I'm asking you for is 3 images that are outputs. Okay? And we'll be going through, not next class, but the following 4 classes. In exercise, no, I think it is, I don't know, I have to go back. It's either 127, 129, 130, and 131, or 128, 129, 130, and 131. I have to go back and check. But those 4 will be going through basically part 2, where we go through the assembly 10.4, 10.6, 10.3, and 10.5. I'm just seeing on this handout that they say 9s. They should be 10s. I corrected it online, but not on your handout. We'll be going through elevations, plans, sections, and perspective. Okay? And on each of those days, you'll be doing one of these. So the further you are along in your model of your cabin, the more you'll be able to do in class versus at home. So you're going to pick 3 of those 4. So you're going to show me an elevation, a plan, a section, or a perspective. You're going to pick 3 of those 4. And I leave that up to you because sometimes you're working on one and it just doesn't work out. And it just doesn't look good, and you can cut that one out. Okay? But you're going to give me 3 of those 4, and you're going to submit that work. I did a terrible job editing this. I edited the version online. You're going to submit the work on May 13th. No, you're not. You're going to submit it on, I think it's December 9th, and I apologize for that oversight. Let me pull it up and just make sure that I have the date correct. Yes, Wednesday, December 9th. It's the last regular day of class. Okay? And you'll submit it on that day. So, anyway, today we're going to work from AutoCAD and pull that into SketchUp, and I'm going to show you the workflow that I've kind of developed that seems to work nicely for doing this. I've always been frustrated because it's a bit chunky in terms of how the two talk together, and I think that this workflow makes it a little bit more simple. So we have 2 parts here. One, I pulled up my original AutoCAD file from last class that shows my layout here. We don't care at all about the Layout tab. What we care about is the Model tab, which gives us the topo lines, and it gives me the 4 elevations that have been flipped out, and it gives me my floor plan established. If you didn't do layers, it may be worth going back and reviewing and making sure that things are on their correct layers so that you can elect to turn things on and turn things off. But again, that's a matter of what feels right to you. One thing that I would suggest is actually taking the doors and putting them on their own layer. You'll find that in SketchUp it'll be nice to turn these doors off. So I have not done that yet, and I'm going to go ahead and first make a layer called doors. Oops, if I can type. And then I'm going to change all of the doors to be on the doors layer. So we'll change those to be on doors. And you can go through, maybe I should make these on doors too. You can put those on doors as well. So I have those done. I'm going to go ahead and save my file. A lot of times when I do an export, I'll actually do a save as, just so I have a second copy of the file. Doesn't really matter. You don't need to do it. The good news is SketchUp 2015 recognizes the AutoCAD 2013 file format, which is still the current file format. So AutoCAD doesn't update the files too dramatically every year. So anything from 2013 on is still the 2013 file format. So we're in 2015 here. If you have 2016 at home, it's all cross-compatible. So we can leave it as that. So I just went ahead and I saved my work. And I'm going to go ahead and jump over into SketchUp. And so I've already opened SketchUp up. I am going to check the little triangle next to template and make sure that I pick architectural design feet and inches before I start using SketchUp, because I'm going to want to make sure that I'm in feet and inches, which I am. And I'm going to close this instructor box, and I'm going to close my shadow settings, and I'm going to close my styles because I don't need any of those right now. I'm also going to get rid of the little person because, again, the person doesn't matter. Okay? So I have basically a blank slate to start working with, and what I'm going to want to do is bring in the AutoCAD file. And so I'll go ahead and go to File and then Import. And when I click on File and Import, by default it's looking for, in this case it's a SketchUp file or a 3ds file, but in the list of file types you can see something called AutoCAD DWG files. That's what we're going to be looking for. And I'm then going to go to my flash drive. And my AutoCAD floor plan is right here. And I'll go ahead and click on Open. Oh, I made a mistake. I was supposed to click on Options first. We'll go back and fix that. Let's try that one more time. File, Import, AutoCAD floor plan. Click on the Options button here. And I want to make sure that my units are not in feet, but they're in inches. And I tend to check these two boxes, merge coplanar faces and orient faces consistently. And if you want, you can preserve the drawing origin. I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I'll go ahead and say Open. And we'll let it process for a little bit of time. And depending on the complexity of the drawing that you start with from AutoCAD, this can take more or less time to actually come in. No, you're fine. You're in perspective view. OK, so it finally finished. Why it took mine longer, I don't know. But here it is in its format here. And if we look at it kind of down in the perspective view, you can see where my floor plan is. Right now it's in a style that's a little bit difficult to see because it's a little chunky. I'm going to go to Window and then Styles, and I'm going to switch out of the sketchy edges back to the default, and I'll do just the default. Let me see here. I'm going to go to Hidden Line, just so it's just plain lines. It'll just help me to see it a little bit. OK, so I have this piece that came in as an AutoCAD drawing. It is a bunch of live lines, but in order to have good kind of reference points, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this whole object a component such that it's not going to affect the geometry that it creates, but it's a good reference guide. I've done it where I've just used these as live lines. The problem is it gets really messy with the layers, and some stuff works and some stuff doesn't. It tends to be a little bit easier to just establish this stuff earlier on. So I'm going to go ahead and select all. So either Edit, Select All, or Control A will do that. And I'm going to right-click while my mouse is over one of the blue objects. And I'm going to select Make Component. And when I select Make Component, I can rename this, and we'll call this AutoCAD. We'll call it AutoCAD XREF. And I'll go ahead and say Create. I do want to make sure that the checkbox here, Replace Selection with Component, is checked so that I end up replacing the lines with the component. And what that does is it makes this kind of like a grouped object. You could do the same thing with a grouped object. The nice thing is that this is something I can go back and forth and edit and change as it goes along. So now I need to do a few more modifications to this. The first thing that I'll do is I'll move it so that I have a point. We use that guide point there, is at 0, 0. So I'm going to click on the little move icon. And I'm going to move from that over to the origin, I hope. Like that. And so now that's reoriented a bit for me. Now, if I look at under Window, if I look at Layers, you'll see that all of the layers from my AutoCAD file came in with this file. Okay? Which also means that I have the ability to turn them on and turn them off. So for example, if I find topography and I check the box for topography, see how the topography is turned off? So even though it's inside a component, doesn't mean that I can't change or turn off and turn on layers. Okay? The one other thing that I'm going to want is I'm going to want a layer that represents the whole AutoCAD component. So I'm going to click on the little plus sign next to layers, and I'm going to call this AutoCAD XREF. And I want to change the layer that this XREF is on. So if I select it so that it's blue, and I go to Window, Entity Info, we can move this down over here. I can change the layer of this entity to be on the AutoCAD XREF layer. And I do that so that I can turn the whole thing off and the whole thing back on. Okay? So I'm actually going to dock this over on the side here, and I'm going to keep working with it. Okay? So right now, my floor is at level 0 in the Z-plane. Okay? I know because of the topography that I really need this floor to be up about 3 feet or so to accommodate for the slope of the terrain. So I'm going to take this whole component, select it, and I'm going to click on the Move tool, and I'm going to move it up in the Z direction. And you can tell when it's moving in the Z because the little line shows up as blue, and it kind of snaps to be on the blue axis. And then I'll type 3 feet in there for the height. So if I were to orbit down, you can see that it's floating above the ground plane a bit. Right? And that's compensating for the slope of the hill long term. Okay? So now I have this established, and I can take it a step further, and I can actually right-click on the component, and I can go to Lock, which will change the objects from blue to red, meaning that I can't edit them or adjust them at all right now. Okay? There's going to come a point in time where I'm going to unlock them, but I want you to be aware that that kind of happens. So I'm going to start with kind of the foundation for this building, and I'll do that right by using the pencil tool, and my current layer is layer 0, and I'm okay with that. And I'm going to start at one corner, and I'm going to trace my way around the building. Okay? And so my building has these little wings on it, so it's a little bit more work than just doing a regular rectangle to trace around the exterior of the building. But I'm going to work my way around the building. I'm excluding those stairs because I want to be able to model them separately later. And when I finish, right, it's going to make, we hope, a surface. So let me go ahead and turn off my AutoCAD XREF. And there is my enclosed shape, which also made a surface. I'm having trouble viewing the surface in this style, so I'm going to go back to my window and then my styles. And I'm going to pick one of these other styles. Yeah, that one will work. Just so that I can see the surface more easily. Okay? So this surface then represents kind of the foundation of my building. And I can go ahead and I can use the push-pull tool, right, to move that surface down 3 feet, which makes then the overall foundation before I build up my walls. That makes sense so far? Okay? Relatively easy. Now I knew that that 3 feet exists, but I want to spend a little bit more time with the AutoCAD file and specifically the elevations. So let me go ahead and turn off the topography. So we'll uncheck that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do what's called an edit of the component. So again, if I select it, the component turns out red because it's locked. I have to unlock it before I can work with it. So let me go ahead and click on Unlock. And then I'm going to work, and we'll start with this elevation right here. Right there. And what I want to do is I want to rotate this elevation, right, so that it is in its correct 3 dimensions. And in order to do this accurately, I'm going to go ahead and give myself a little box over here on the side. And it doesn't matter the dimensions of this box, but I'm going to use that to help me rotate. Okay? So now I need to go in and I need to edit this component. So again, if I select it, the whole component turns out blue. I'm going to right-click on it and say Edit Component, which will let me inside. You see that things that are not part of the component get grayed out, which is good. And I'm going to go ahead and select just this piece. And I'm going to use the Rotate tool right here. And I'm going to use this box to help me do the rotation. And I may have to orbit a little bit so that we see this better. I'm going to use that box to help me do the rotation such that I can rotate in this direction. Okay? And so again, this box helps me orient the protractor. So in this case, I'm oriented to this face. And then I'm clicking where I want to start my rotation, my axis of rotation, and then where I want it to move to. So there it is, flipped up in space. And now I need to move it so that it's oriented correctly with this building over here. Okay? So I know, right, that the bottom floor of my building lines up with this step. It also would line up with the bottom of this window because these are floor-to-ceiling windows. So depending on where, I think the step is probably the easiest reference point. Excuse me. I'm going to draw a line that just sticks out. And then I'm going to move with the line and the object here. I'm going to move this over so that it snaps to where that point is. Zoom up. Whoop. You know, while I'm here, I think I accidentally had a floor plan from way over there. It's just going to be distracting. So there it is. Right? And it's snapped. And if I orient, we can kind of see that it's snapped over there. Looks like I left behind a few little points, so we can get rid of these. Right? There's always a little bit of cleanup necessary. So I'm still in the editing of the components. So I'll go ahead and create another little box over here. And I'll ultimately delete these boxes afterward anyway. And I'm going to rotate this wall. There. Again, I'll use rotate. And I'll go from here to there. And then same strategy, where I'm going to find a point that will correspond here. So I'm going to go ahead and go from here over. And then I'll have to adjust for the height of this in a second. I'm holding down Shift to add that to the selection. And then I'm going to move. And that lines up on this corner, but it's too high. So I'm going to have to move this down a bit in the Z direction. And I don't really know how tall it's going to be just yet. So I'm going to do a reference line because I know where this is. And so we'll reference that. And if I did a line from this side here, we can see that I'm too tall. Hold on a second here. Right, we can see that those two lines don't match up. They're ultimately going to have to match up, and they're going to match up right over this point. So I can go straight up from this to there. And again, I don't need the surface. But that's going to tell me where I can move this one down. So we'll go ahead and select this part and move from here to there. So I'm just using that as a point of reference to make sure that this elevation matches up. Like that. Okay? And then we can go ahead and delete a few of these other pieces because we don't need them long term. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing. We'll delete this box. I'll orbit around, and I'll do this for each of the elevations, which can be a little bit tedious, but it's worth the time. So let me do another rectangle here. There. Pull that up. I'll select this. I'll rotate from there to there. Now this one's going to be a little bit easier. I can go right from that point and match that up. There we go. And that's going to match up right to that point. And then I have just one left, so let's get rid of this box. Orbit again. By the way, you can switch into the orbit command by pressing O. Sometimes that's an easier strategy than actually clicking on the button. There we go. Pull this up. And we'll rotate again. And there. There. And I can make sure that these line up by going way over here and moving all of this right there. And so this works easy and clean because I've already spent the time to orient these elevations in my AutoCAD drawing. If your AutoCAD drawing doesn't have all the points, it'll be a little bit more challenging to line this stuff up, but it's up to you in terms of how you do it. So right now I'll hit escape a couple times, which will get me outside of my component. You can see that it still highlights entirely in blue. So I was just in component editing mode. Looks like I left behind a little line there. So in order to get rid of that, I'd have to right click on it again and say edit component, and then I could get rid of this line there. And so we'll go ahead and escape a couple times, and we'll get back out again. Okay? So I have my component, and I have my elevations. And this is going to help when I start to create the rest of the floor plans and stuff on my building here. Okay? So we'll start next with creating the interiors of the walls. So if we turn off my AutoCAD XREF, we see that I still have that foundation. That was my first piece. Now I'm going to go ahead and divide this up so that I see my walls themselves. So let's turn this back on. And again, I'll use the pencil tool or the line tool. And I'm going to trace around the interiors of these walls. So I'll stop there. And then we'll continue. Come on. It's having issues zooming. There we go. There. Notice that I'm going right over all of the doors. Right? I'm not trying to capture any actual openings. Oops. And I can double check my work by turning on and turning off my layers. Looks like I missed one segment of line that would go right here. And I can turn off the XREF. We can see that I'm again starting to divide it up. I'll continue. You resume here. We'll continue right there. I can use the rectangle tool if it's easier and faster depending on where it shows up. And again, I can turn on and turn off to see how I'm doing. So you can see that I divided up those rooms. Looks like I still need the bathroom here. So we'll go ahead and turn this back on. And I'll use the rectangle tool for the bathroom because it's just a rectangle. And I also need a line that goes right over here. And I need a line that goes right over here. And there, there. Okay, so if I turn this off now, and we look at this, oh, looks, I missed one more little piece. I missed a little piece there. All right, so now we're looking at this, and it's like, okay, now I have the bulk of the, I'm going to close this styles window. I have the bulk of the walls established. Okay, so I can then select on the surface there, that represents the walls, and I can use the push-pull tool to pull that up. I'm going to use my elevation as a reference point. So I'll use my push-pull tool, and I'll start pulling those walls up, but I know where the top of at least some of the walls should be, which is right there. And so I'm using that elevation as a measuring tool, so to speak. So I'm going to snap to the top of where the wall would be here, and then I need to pull up the wall in this section to be a little bit taller, and I need to pull the wall up in this section to be even taller. So I'm going to divide where the wall is going to get a little bit taller. So we'll divide it there. We'll divide it there. And that one's fine. And I'm going to select this piece, oops, right here. And you see that when I divided that, right, this part of the surface isn't selected anymore. It's only this part. And I can then use the push-pull tool again. And we can pull this part up a little bit taller. And so we're going to pull it till it snaps to that point. And so if we orbit around, we can see that that then slid up on that side. Okay? Likewise, this section over here needs to be pulled up a little bit taller too. So I'll divide it. Oops, I don't have a good angle to draw this. There. I'll divide it there. I'll divide it right here. And then I can select this piece. And I can use the push-pull tool again. And I can pull it up till it matches up with that side. Right? And again, this is working nicely because I already established my elevations and what those elevations look like. Okay? On top of this, then, I need the roof to be established. And so depending on how I want to go about this, it may be helpful to make the roof a separate component. It may be helpful to just go ahead and draw the roof. I'm going to go ahead and draw the roof. And I'm going to do that in separate sections. So I'll start here with the roof for this section. And I'll draw a big rectangle that covers it. And then I'll go ahead and extrude, right, each of these pieces. So we're going to go to the top there. We're going to go to the top there. We're going to go to the top there. Right? once I get to the top, I can delete these extra line segments to make it a clean surface up at the top. Like that. And now I have the top part of this particular side. I'll do the same thing for the other sides. Let me flip around here and look at this end. Okay, this was part of the design of this end, was that this edge needed to be a diagonal edge, a sloping edge. It wasn't going to be straight. So in that case, I'll have to draw a little diagonal line that goes from here to there. And I'll draw another diagonal line that goes from here to there, which will allow me to get rid of this part. Oops. Of the roof. And again, it's dependent on, you know, the look that you were trying to establish for your building as to whether those are going to happen or not. So I'll continue on. Right? Looks like I missed an extrusion here, so we need to pull this one up to there, and then I can do the same roof setup here, where I'm going to pull a rectangle across that section of the roof, and then I'll use push-pull. If it didn't quite work, which it didn't in that case, I may need to do a couple rectangles. I may need to make a smaller rectangle in here to fill that piece in, and then it's again a matter of using push-pull and matching up with my overall height. And then I'll delete out the pieces. Okay? So I'm using each of these elevations as reference for the 3D model. Remembering, of course, that because this is on its own XREF layer, I can turn it off and see just the model that I'm building, of my building. You guys see how that works? Okay? So to me, that's kind of the easiest way to work through this and start to establish what's going on in the building. As you're more and more comfortable with SketchUp, you'll realize that it's really a matter of just extruding, dividing, cutting, right, and continuing. I would do the same thing for the windows. You can elect to use any components you want. If you want to use furniture from the 3D warehouse or whatever, that's totally fine. Make sure it's on its own layer so you can ultimately turn it off if you don't like it. But really, it's a matter of kind of working through the kinks and building it up. So this is the process of going from AutoCAD into SketchUp. I'll continue to model this so we have a little bit more complete model when we move on and I show you elevations and plans and that sort of thing. Are there any questions? No? Okay, then I'll turn you loose.